So, we've discussed the desperate need for capital for the energy transition, for building Nusantara, the new capital, for building Indonesia up as a technological powerhouse to convert its natural resources into value-added products. Why, given the GDP growth rate of Indonesia over the years, hasn't this capital really come in the amount that you would expect?
That's a very interesting question. I just did a talk on this. If we take a look at Southeast Asia, for the last 15 years, Southeast Asia has been getting about $200 billion worth of FDI. Half of that, at least, goes to Singapore. So out of $200 billion, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's slightly less, but Singapore has been getting about $100 to $110 billion out of the $200 billion. Whereas Indonesia, in the last 10 years, has been getting about $26 to $31 billion. Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand each would have been getting about $10 to $20 billion. The stark difference between what Indonesia, Thailand, and the rest have been getting with respect to what Singapore has been getting is not about ideology, it's not about geography, it's not about natural resources. It's really about trustworthiness. Right? Singapore has been able to position itself as a trustworthy destination. And that really dovetails into the rule of law. So this is something that I think somebody like Prabowo needs to basically embrace. And to the extent he can, I get asked a lot about, why he would have been, telling the electorate and the people around the world that, he's going to be able to grow the economy at 8%. Well, actually, the answer could be in capital formation or foreign direct investment. I mean, the baseline for Indonesia's growth trajectory is around 4.5% to 5%. So if he were to want to grow the economy at 8%, we're only talking about a delta of 3%. So in the context of $1.3 trillion economy, we're talking about $40 billion worth of FDI. So if he's really serious about this, he can forget the other letters of the economic formula, i.e. C, G, X, or M. He can just focus on that letter I, investment. If he were to be able to crank up the FDI from $31 billion to $71 billion with a delta of $40 billion, game on, right? He's going to be able to deliver 8% growth. This is before the multiplier effect. Now, 71 billion is still a lot less than what Singapore has been able to get every year. And this is on the back of massive liquidity within the G7.
So if you had to do three things to bring in that capital, what would they be? You're a financier. What three things should he do to attract capital?
Well, rule of law is not about absolutism. It's really about directionality, right? So if he were to do one or two things as to improve the enforceability of rules and regulations, as soon as potential investors perceive that he is actually walking the talk with respect to increasing the enforceability of rules and regulations, money will come in. It doesn't have to be today, right? The perfection of the enforceability of rules and regulations does not necessarily have to be today, but if he's taken 1, 2, or 3 steps as to move the needle, as to approach a higher degree of enforceability of rules and regulations, I think money will come disproportionately much more than whatever we might have been seeing so far, because that liquidity just needs to be allocated. And the second, I think he needs to be quite pronounced about how that capital is going to be utilized, right? Now, you take a look at Southeast Asia, right? I think it's fair to assume that Malaysia has been really good at positioning itself as a semiconductor, right, destination. I mean, you're seeing the Intels of the world, the Nvidias of the world, pumping, capital into that destination. You see Thailand as a very, very robust player in the automotive, right? And they've been able to get BYD to open up a factory that employs 5,000 people. Indonesia, I think, has quite robustly played the role of the automotive, right, destination for the Japanese. Now, or lately, increasingly, the Koreans. We're seeing the presence of the Hyundais and the Kias and the Hyundais of the world. They're thinking of building factories in Indonesia, along with their peripheral supporting industries, the components and the batteries and all that stuff, right? So I think Prabowo and his team would have to figure out what makes sense for Indonesia so that it differentiates itself from the Singapores of the world, which is at the top echelon of the value chain. Malaysia getting towards the top echelon of the value chain. Thailand and Indonesia being at the same place. Vietnam, I think, they've been in the steel making capabilities, the car making capabilities. The Philippines, a lot more in the services. I think Indonesia would have to position itself very robustly in terms of how it's going to be able to move up the value chain without infringing upon the pre-existing narratives of the neighbors. I think that could be played out quite nicely.